This episode of Q Point Podcast is pre-recorded, produced and sponsored by Karina Quirk, broker at Next Home Experience.
Different views.
I know your story.
From different cues.
Incredible job.
He's David Quirk.
You brought it up.
And she's Karina Quirk.
Imagine.
This is
Q Point.
Thank you for joining us for part 2 with Maine Democratic gubernatorial candidate Dr. Nirav Shah.
So I'm sure that some of these small businesses must have told you about energy cost.
Yeah.
Do you have a plan to lower our electricity bill?
Yes, but I don't want to overstate it. You're absolutely right. Energy costs and the overall cost of doing business were a feature in just about every single business roundtable meeting that I had. And again, energy was at the top of the list. So I want to talk broadly about ways that we can lower the price of energy, not specific to commercial energy markets, but just more broadly for residential and commercial. And to me, where I go first and foremost is what Maine needs more of is just more supply. Very similar to housing. The reason why housing and energy in Maine are in part so costly, not the only reason, but one of them, is because our supply is limited. So for me, that entails bringing in as much homegrown supply of energy as possible. Some of that is through offshore wind. Some of it is onshore wind. Some of it is continuing with the solar developments, although we have to be careful that we don't distort that market. And then some of it entails focusing on newer forms of energy. Geothermal is an area where there's a lot of interest, so on and so forth. So upping the supply. More broadly, I think there's also a lot that we can do to hold CMP accountable. Their business model is one that is common in the utility industry. That is to say, they make money based on how much they spend. I think there are opportunities for Maine to be innovative, to be bold. And rather than reimbursing and compensating CMP based on how much money they spend, maybe we compensate them on how well they run the grid and what their uptime is and things of that nature. And given our relatively small size, we have opportunities to be bold in Maine and hold CMP accountable and actually ask why they are making such a high rate of return when our grid performance is the lowest in the country. So there's a lot more that we can talk about with respect to energy, but bottom line, I want more supply. I do want less reliance on fossil fuels in Maine. We've seen with just the most recent war in Iran how susceptible Maine is to spikes in natural gas. And so the more I think we can decouple from the fossil fuel grid, the better off we will be in the long term.
We've had several candidates that have stated that their plan includes small modular reactors. What's your position?
For me, that's one of those where the proof will be in the pudding. I like the ideas behind those. I've had the opportunity to meet with one of the scientists who is working on those. But at this early stage, it would be putting a lot of eggs into one basket to bet our energy future on small modular reactors. If it turns out to be the case that those are viable and that Mainers want them, then I'm going to be on board with them. But there's a lot of folks here still in Maine who have significant environmental reservations. I happen not to share those, but I understand where they come from. So I don't want to say today that a feature of my energy policy is going to be something that, as of right now, has not actually worked anywhere. There are really promising prototypes. There's one in Wyoming, et cetera. But until those are proven to be effective and can scale, then it's premature to predicate our entire commercial or residential energy policy on them. I'm in favor of them, but again, proof is going to be in the pudding.
What about data centers?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and chatting with folks about it. My view is that a pause on data center development in Maine would have been prudent. So in that regard, I would have signed the legislation that Governor Mills vetoed. Here's why I think a pause would have been prudent. And the biggest reason is that if we are going to have a lot of these large data centers in Maine, notice the if. I'm not even sure that we will, but if we decide as a state that we want them, we should have the regulatory framework in place first. So that's why I think a pause on them would have been prudent. As you correctly noted earlier, there are data suggesting they can jack up electricity rates, which are already sky high in Maine. There's a lot of concern about water usage, and there's also concerns about the sounds that they emit and the ways that that could affect people. So I think getting our heads around all of that and having regulations in place first, rather than letting them come in and then trying to regulate them after the fact, would have been a prudent thing to do.
Do you have a plan for PFAS?
Yes, it's in our environmental plan. And I'm really glad you raised that. When I was at Maine CDC, I was part of the broader team that was involved thinking about what PFAS regulation was going to look like and how we could implement it. And I was really proud of the work that we did in Maine. Indeed, in the Biden administration, a lot of what Maine did was something of a model for what the US EPA was doing. I was disappointed that the Trump administration decided to pull back its proposed regulations around PFAS. What that means is that on this issue, and frankly, a host of others, it's going to have to be governors and state governments who are in the lead. PFAS is a very good example of that. For me right now, the PFAS discussion is first and foremost about water and what the acceptable levels of PFAS in our water ought to be, particularly as it relates to kids. The other area that I am focused on is, among many, there's a lot here, but the other area I'm focused on is farmland. Many of the farmers whose farms have been affected were essentially doing what DEP advised them to do. And now their land has not been useful because of PFAS contamination. The state has been purchasing now 2 farmlands. But my thing, and there's research underway about this that I want to accelerate, is because of work that researchers here have done in Maine, there's actually some promising data showing that other types of crops can be grown on PFAS-containing lands, that because of those crops' biology, the PFAS doesn't actually get into the end product. That research is preliminary, but boy, wouldn't it be a revolutionary thing if here in Maine, we figured out what could be safely grown on PFAS-contaminated land, and thus were able to return all of those farms to production. It'd be a boon for the farmers, it'd be a boon for our agriculture industry, it'd be a boon for the whole globe. And we can do that here in Maine.
Interesting. How far out is that research?
It's a ways off. I don't want to lie. There's some really preliminary, interesting data. But as with anything in science, you got to get data, you got to verify it, you got to test it and make sure it's locked down before we can scale it up on a large scale, somewhat similar to small modular reactors. Early, encouraging, but let's see. The proof will be in the pudding. It's going to change a lot, though.
One of your big responsibilities will be the budget. Do you plan on scaling back the budget at all? We're at $14 billion now.
It's a great and very critical question. Let me just say, as a background matter, one of the jobs of being a state agency director, and certainly one of my big tasks when I was the deputy director at the US CDC, was overseeing our budget, both working with Congress to secure our budget, managing the spending in the budget, and then being accountable back to it, to Congress, to the bigger department, et cetera. So budgetary fluency is something that is difficult, but it's something that I've learned in my time as an executive in government. So how should we think about the state of Maine budget? Well, the state of Maine's budget did grow during the pandemic in large part because of the influx of federal dollars. What one budgetary expert referred to is that growth that sometimes accompanies a crisis. Many of those dollars from the various federal legislation that were passed during the COVID era, many of those dollars will soon be expiring. And that, coupled with cutbacks more broadly from Congress to Medicaid, SNAP, are going to mean that the state of Maine's budget is going to be facing a lot of pressure. So a difficult task for whoever the next governor is going to be the need to balance providing those services that we've talked about, healthcare, food, infrastructure for more housing development, with making sure we are being fiscally responsible. The state can't deficit spend. We've got to spend in our own means. How do we go about doing that? Some of it will entail looking for additional sources of revenue. We've already passed a millionaire's tax. There are discussions about other ways that we can look for revenue. To me, the most productive, stable, and durable long-term solution for more revenue, we've already talked about it, it's growth. It's more people coming to the state of Maine. It's more businesses moving to Maine. It's more entrepreneurs taking their hobby and turning it into employment. That is going to be the most secure method to not just have a more thriving economy, but to generate and broaden and deepen the tax base that we are going to need in order to fund a lot of the social service programs that I've talked about. Is that an easy thing? No. Does it happen overnight? It does not. But it is the only way that societies, states, you name it, have gone to being truly productive and prosperous. So one of the reasons that I am so focused on getting more housing and getting more doctors and nurses and more businesses is because at their core, the thread that unites all of those is they add to growth here in the state of Maine.
The pace that we're going at over the last 7 years or so, we'll be at $20 billion in 8 years.
I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think I might see that one a little bit differently. Again, a lot of that pace greatly accelerated because of federal dollars that were infused because of the pandemic. PPP loans, ARPA money, and then the infrastructure grant money. A lot of that was one-time or shorter-term spending that was a function of the pandemic. I don't know that we are going to see that same acceleration in our state budget. Indeed, I suspect we are going to see a deceleration. For example, with Medicaid funding. The projected loss on the Medicaid front from last summer's big, beautiful budget bill is projected to be $5 billion with a B dollars over the next 10 years. $5 billion. So I'm not sure that things are going to continue accelerating. Indeed, it's going to be probably the opposite. But let me just sort of juxtapose that with the growth piece, especially on employment. One of the numbers that keeps me up at night that I really want to try to reverse is that right now, according to the state of Maine and their economic forecasts, through 2031 in the state of Maine, the projected growth in employment across all sectors is projected to be 0. And that is from an official state of Maine report. We've got to turn that around. We've absolutely got to turn that around. And if we don't, then the ideas that I have around childhood hunger, healthcare for all, those are going to be very, very difficult. So a big part of my job is not just to look for additional sources of revenue from folks who are already here, but additional sources of revenue from the folks who I want to attract here.
You are listening to Q Point Podcast. I'm Karina Quirk, co-hosting with my husband, David Quirk, and we are having a conversation with Maine Democratic gubernatorial candidate, Dr. Nirav Shah. So, growing business, don't you think that a millionaire's tax and increasing the income tax and all of these things is not really going to bring more business to Maine?
It's a great question. I'm glad that you raise it. I don't think so, but let me state my position and then the limitations behind it, as I always try to do. One of my general approaches to taxation is that those who can pay more ought to pay more. My other approach is that the more we can move our tax burden onto folks like tourists who are coming here to enjoy our state, the more I want to do so. But one of my overall approaches to taxes is that if you can pay more because you have more means, then I think you should pay more. That's why I'm not in favor of a flat tax, but I'm in favor of a progressive tax. And that is why I was in favor of the recently enacted millionaire's tax. Before that tax, someone who was making $75,000 or $80,000 a year was paying the very same top marginal rate as somebody who was making $800,000 a year. I think that person who is making that higher income can pay just a little bit more. So that's why I was in favor of it. That said, is there a point at which we can tax so much as to drive people away or deter new businesses? Without a doubt. And other places in the world have seen that. But I don't think a 2% tax or a new bracket at 9.15%, which is what this does. The data that I have seen from other states, New York, Massachusetts, et cetera, do not suggest that there will be this exodus, this capital flight at that level. So that's why I supported it. Now, here's what I will say, though. The estimate from what that tax will generate is thought to be about $90 million. And again, we have a $7 billion annual budget, 14 or so billion every 2 years. I also have been clear with folks that this tax is not the solution to our long-term budgetary woes. And I proposed that this tax, this resulting revenue, go directly into the education budget. Because number one, that would help our schools. We talked about that earlier. Number two, it would help reduce property taxes a smidge. Instead, that revenue from this millionaire's tax is just going to go into the big pot of money. And I think that was a mistake.
Well, to take it a step further, at least maybe there should have been a carve out for S corporations, because as you know, we have 137,000 small business owners here. And even though their tax return may say they have $1 million, they didn't actually earn that $1 million, or they don't actually have that money because they're an S corp and it goes right through their...
The pass-through.
Yeah.
Yep. To your point about S corps and the pass-through phenomenon, that is something that merits further discussion. I want to think through how that can be implemented before I sign off on it or endorse that idea. But I certainly heard from folks who have raised that concern, and I hear them loud and clear. I look forward as governor to sitting down and having deeper discussions about what that looks like.
One more step further.
Yeah.
Many of Maine's small businesses are the ones that support their local nonprofits and community organizations by donating to them. We've personally given locally, as well as obviously Quirk Auto Group has given millions of dollars to Maine causes over the years. If you keep taxing them, that's funds that's not going to go to those nonprofits that depend on them in the community.
I think that is fair. And what I will say is, first, the millionaire's tax is just as to individuals. It did not affect the corporate tax rate. So that, I think, is an important distinction. The corporate tax system still is intact. That said, I recognize that there can often be trade-offs between some of these things. As I said earlier, we are not in a world where there are easy solutions. There are only very difficult trade-offs. That said, for me, the benefit of this tax would have been to sequester that funding for the education system, because that is now at 55%, but that's the bare minimum. It's not the top end. So my druthers would have been to use that money to further fund education in our schools. I disagreed about the money just going into the general pot, because a couple of years from now, I think it will be reasonable to ask, what did we accomplish with the millionaire's tax? What problem did we directly solve? Did we feed more kids? Did we educate anybody especially? Did we improve our test scores? And without that one-for-one, it's going to be difficult to measure the social good that the millionaire's tax could have done.
I appreciate you sticking with me on these questions. It's a concern I hear frequently, and I think it's an important part of the conversation.
I'm glad that you're raising these questions, because here's the honest thing. If I can't take questions, tough questions about my views and answer them, and if I can't sit down with folks who see a couple of different issues differently from me, then number one, I have no business running for office. And number two, it means that something has broken down in our society. So I welcome tough questions like this, because one, that's the job. And number two, that is the only way we actually get towards some understanding of what's going on. One of the things that frustrates me, frankly, about folks on every side of the ideological spectrum is that it is possible, because of social media, to go through your entire day, your entire month, and never see or read a single thing that you disagree with. Because these algorithms are so good at figuring out what you want and what you like and feeding you more and more and more of that. So if we never sit down with folks who maybe disagree with us on a couple of things, then that divide is only going to get worse and worse and worse. So I welcome those questions. Keep it coming. Toward that end, here is how much I care about disagreement. If I could wave a magic wand right now for our schools, the one thing that I would add with that magic wand is a multi-year curriculum, maybe starting in 8th or 9th grade, about civil discourse and respectful disagreement. Where I think America has gone in a bad way is that we have lost the art of respectful disagreement. So if I could wave that magic wand, I would want to wave it so that we teach kids how to disagree better. And just to go back to the town halls, not only have they been helpful to me to understand issues, they have been welcoming places where people who disagree with me can show up and put the screws to me. That is so important to me that the only campaign promise that I have made, is that as governor, I have pledged to continue that tradition of town halls as governor. And what I have committed to is to hold 2 town halls every single month that I am governor. That's how Mainers first got to know me during the pandemic, showing up and taking tough questions. It's been a hallmark of my campaign, and it should not end just because my campaign ends and I'm in the Blaine House. So the only promise that I have made is that as governor, I will continue that tradition and keep showing up at least twice a month so that this dialogue can continue.
Speaking of COVID, looking back now, would you have handled any of these restrictions that we went through differently?
Sure. A big part of leadership, especially in a crisis, is looking back on the last crisis and learning from it. And I have in my career as a public servant managed hundreds of crises, maybe over 1,000 outbreaks and hundreds of emergency to crises. And I learned something from every single one of them. And that's what leadership is. That applies with equal force to COVID. If I had the benefit back then of what I know now, then are there things I would have done differently in retrospect? Of course. For example, would have I approached schools the same way? Absolutely not. We would have approached the question of schools in a much different posture if we knew at the moment what the relatively lower and less likely impact of COVID on kids was. That said, I don't want to make it seem as if it's an easy question. Although young kids may not have been as affected by COVID, many teachers are older. And schools, even though the kids might not be affected, those kids can then go visit their grandparents. So I don't want to make it seem as if it's an easy decision, but if I knew then what I knew now about kids, I would have approached schools a lot differently. That's leadership. That said, we did not know that at the time. So I stand by the decisions we made in the moment. But if there is another COVID-like crisis when I am governor, we will absolutely think about schools differently.
So where were you getting all the information from so you could make a decision for the state?
It was a variety of sources. Some of it was coming from the US CDC. Some of it was coming from studies that were being published that other researchers across the United States were doing. And then a lot of it was coming from the experience in other countries. I paid very, very close attention to the ways in which different countries were fashioning their COVID policies. For example, I paid a lot of attention to what was happening in Sweden, because Sweden very famously was very lax with their COVID precautions. Their theory was that the more we lock down, the worse our economy is going to be. So I was very intrigued by this. As it turns out, Sweden didn't really benefit economically. Again, their theory was, we're going to take a hands-off approach. That way our economy is going to rebound quicker compared to Norway and Finland. But the thing is, their economy rebounded at the exact same rate and more people died. So they didn't even get what they were hoping to get from their hands-off approach. So I was studying not just what was happening in other states, but what was happening across the globe, as well as what the US CDC was putting out.
Tell us about Ebola.
It's not good. There is right now in East Africa a very significant outbreak of Ebola that has been raging for at least 2 months, perhaps even longer. As of this morning, there were well over 1,000 cases and over 250,000 deaths. This outbreak is not likely to come to the United States. So I want to be very clear. The risk to America and Americans is low. The risk, however, of this outbreak destabilizing an already very unstable part of the continent of East Africa is very high. And anytime anything destabilizes anywhere in the globe, America is at risk. Our national security could be at risk. Our economy could potentially be at risk. Many of the minerals that go into the cars that are being sold here come from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So this is a significant outbreak. And here's what I will say as a public health matter. As I mentioned, Ebola is not likely to come to the United States. But if another virus or pandemic were to emerge that threatened the United States, we are not ready for it. And that is in part because of the ways that RFK and President Trump have dismantled much of the architecture that would have previously been in place to spot, detect, diagnose, and respond to these outbreaks sooner. So one of the things that keeps me up at night right now, and certainly will keep me up at night as governor, is what can we do here in the state of Maine to shore up our defenses so that if the next pandemic does hit, we are as prepared for that as we were back in 2019.
So we want to thank you again for coming in. We know that you're the front runner for the primary that's coming up June 9th. What do you think separates you from the other candidates?
Well, first, thank you all for having me. This has been, as we talked about, a wonderful conversation, and I love nothing more than respectful, spirited disagreement. So it's such a pleasure, and I look forward to doing this again as governor, if not sooner. And as you noted, it is quite the honor to be the front runner right now. That said, nothing is assured in politics. You can play a lot of basketball in the last 60 seconds of the game. Between now and June 9th, I am going to be out there every single hour of every day, talking with as many Mainers as I can and earning every single vote. My campaign motto right now, and from the day we launched, is all gas, no brakes, which is how I drive in the snow. And that's what I'm going to do between now and the primary. But I think there are a couple of reasons why my message is resonating and that do account for me being the front runner. Number one is that Mainers know me. Disagree with me or not, what Mainers know is that I will show up and give it to them straight, and we will have that respectful dialogue. So I think that is different from the way that politics has been done thus far. Another reason I'm the front runner is that I am trying to do a different thing, which is I am trying to move away from politics as usual and move toward politics as problem solving. Just in this conversation, every time there's a problem, I want to think about solutions, not blame. So I'm trying to move toward politics as problem solving. The third thing is that right now there is this sense that what we need is a fresh look at longstanding challenges. And I have been in state government, including in the Mills administration, but I've also served in another state. I've also served at the federal level. I have not been a creature of Augusta for the past couple of decades. What I bring to the table is a fresh look at a lot of these challenges. A background in healthcare, a background in law, economics, having served at the federal government. All of those assets are things that I bring to bear in a, as much as possible, non-political way. I'm really about elected officials as leaders, not elected officials as politicians. And that's why I think I'm the front runner. That's why I'm going to win on June 9th.
Maine Democratic gubernatorial candidate, Dr. Nirav Shah. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure. I can't wait to be back on, guys.
Yes, thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
You bet.
You've been listening to Q Point.
Follow us at qpointpodcast.com or on your favorite streaming app.
Q Point Podcast invites guests and candidates from all parties to join the conversation. The views, information, opinions, and comments expressed during this program do not necessarily represent those of the host, Q Point Podcast, associates, affiliates, and CQRE LLC.